Hi, this is Privateer Station, and today we're bringing you day 733 of Russian war with Ukraine. As always, with former advisor to the office of the President of Ukraine, Lieutenant Colonel Alexei Arestovych, and Ukrainian journalist Nikolay Feldman. Today they go into depth of discussing the possible scenarios for Ukraine in this coming third year of war. None of them is too shiny, but these are real matters that somebody needs addressing. Special thank you goes to our members. Today it is Kay and Paul who recently joined. Thank you for supporting our work. Guys like you help our channel to bring more materials to the English-speaking audience around the world. And with this, let's deep dive into day 733. Enjoy. Hello everybody, this is Project Alpha. My name is Nikolay Feldman and you're watching War Diary with Alexei Arestovych, who is joining us via stream. Yes, good evening. All right. Perhaps let's start with 0 to 60 with the press conference of Zelensky, who came out to public, gave certain signals, was rather well behaved, that was noticed by many, looked confident, and was actually supposedly holding his emotions in some matters. These are all good things I can say about it. Perhaps you have a couple more. I could have said a few negative remarks, but I will not for the moment. So you think they can probably derive some lessons? Yeah, of course they do. But otherwise they would not have been able to hold that long. Unfortunately, these are just some occasional lessons, not a strategy. One of the points of contention is losses, and here's a possible option for lessons learned. He officially declared that we have lost 35,000. Everybody who fought in this war knows that the losses are much higher. So the question is, what number did the president voice? Supposedly, these are the ones that are absolutely verified elements, verified data, just like BBC and the others. But here comes the question. Those who at least have some understanding of the scale of our losses, and I would remind that over 730 days for the time when the press conference was held, 31,000 lost is roughly 42.5 men and women per day for 1,300 kilometers of the front. Everybody who fought at the beginning of war and in other places like Avdiivka, Kupiansk, etc., we have days when 1.5 companies would perish overall along the line of the front. All right, so he probably named only the completely verified ones. And then immediately after the press conference, Telegram channels close to the government started to explain that, of course, there are a lot of people who are missing in action or non-verified, so then they totaled the amount closer to 70,000. And I would remind that even Western publications, according to some general data available, were claiming and calling 70,000 by summer of last year. So I think that number was not exactly thought through. And the presentation of this number, he should have explained that these are the ones that are verified until today. The fact of their loss is documented, and the circumstances as well. Then he also should have explained that this is Ukraine armed forces, but there is also National Guard, there is bodyguards, and there is territorial defense and the others who are also fighting just as actively and dying there. So the question is, have they counted them, right? So I understand their losses are fewer than the army losses, but they exist, right? And then National Guard is actively fighting with operative brigades or joint brigades. Then, by the way, Azov, who was fighting in Mariupol, was fighting as the detachment of National Guard. So if I was presenting that, I would have said that we have verified 31,000 or 35,000. Unfortunately, there is also a big share of missing in action and most likely chances are they're dead and killed in action. But we will never cease to keep looking for them, and we will be looking for them as long as it takes to make sure to bring closure to their families. And the real number is probably bigger, but I'm giving you the number that is officially verified. So that's how I would package this information. But when we have 31,000 deceased and killed in action, it brings a lot of speculations to the scene. It invites them. And it would be a serious issue that will appear on the president's radar if any organization now will go and just count the graves in the country, right? There are names there, dates and everything, and they may come up with a result much bigger than 30,000, and president will have to bring explanations then. And he, of course, will come and explain, but why would you have started bringing it in that fashion as you did, right? So that you have to plug it later. And I think this is the sign of their maturity and ability to derive lessons, because calling the incurred losses of this war, this is a strategic information, and the way I see it, strategic information lost to private interests on this example. It should have been packaged different. And I would say, yeah, this was also, Alexei, as a part of the parade of heightened expectations, because diminishing the losses is also creating the atmosphere that everything doesn't quite suck as it does. Well, on the West, were we begging and asking for aid, and I beg forgiveness from those who died of this war and their relatives, and I have people who have perished in this war in my family and friends, but from the point of view of the media reception, it can be twisted in the following matter. For 2 years, Ukrainians are telling us about the scariest war since the Second World War, about horrible losses and horrible fights, but they only suffered 31,000 dead. So the war is not so bloody, and it seems like Ukrainians can resist and they can hold better. Their losses are not too big. Russia lost a lot more, so perhaps we do not have to be too hasty with our aid to Ukraine. And this is not so. First of all, the losses are bigger. And second, it's not only people who are fighting, right? We cannot be plugging the holes in the front with our soldiers. We need shells, we need material aid, vehicles, systems, and many other things. So you need to be thinking about creating a system of arguments that will work. 31,000 in 2 years of the biggest war in Europe over the last 50 years, this is the number that will generate a lot of questions on the West. And all Ukrainian diplomacy, public and behind the scenes, will have to explain how our words about the apocalyptical fight, about the fall of civilization, correlate with about 30,000 lost, or with our trends to diminish our losses. So why did we have to present it this way in a public sphere? That's where I'm outlining that private interests prevailed over strategic interests. A very common problem of Ukraine and Ukrainian politics. There is also one number that representative of Congress, Andrei Lubinets, Ombudsman of Human Rights, said that we have 28,000 prisoners of war who are being held by Russia. Right, so this number also doesn't flow well with the losses. Of course, it does pose a lot of questions, because prisoners of war, that number is usually way, way less than the losses. So how are you fighting this war if you roughly have 50-50, 50% dead and 50% of the totals missing are captured by Russians? That either tells that half of your army is surrendering or your numbers are wrong. So such an incorrect or problematic presentation of information creates a lot of questions and possible holes in our story down the line. And it would be a question to the first person in the country whether and why does he think that his presentation required to post these numbers, right? Because they affect everything else. And I think this is one of the bigger mistakes to present data in this way. And also what I paid attention to is the number of Russian losses. I also think it's not exactly correlating with the number as it was presented by General Command of Ukraine. And President almost sounding like he denounces the numbers of General Command. And the General Command was voicing the numbers presented by brigades and detachments on the front, so they had at least a source of the data. Look, at war, Nikolay, there's always a tendency to exacerbate the numbers. And that's why General Command was always prefacing their data by estimated overall. And it included different groups: wounded, killed, the ones we captured of the Russian fighters, and missing in action. All right. Otherwise, if you take an overall number, I think was 400,000, and then maybe killed out of that would be at 150,000. Otherwise, if it's a 400 killed, then probably at least another 200 wounded, right? Or even more, just exactly the same amount, another 400 wounded. So again, there is a question here. Because if you bring a number, then it should have been, okay, this is a guaranteed number, or what we actually calculated and documented. And whom are we counting, by the way? Is it Russian army? Is it the troops from Lugansk and Donetsk regions that they've occupied? Because those detachments have humongous losses too. And these numbers, they generated more questions than answers. I think this story is a complex one. All right, I did note myself about this communication that this is a signal sent to Russian Federation, to Putin. The president declared about the global peace summit, and before him there was Yermak, who also voiced an idea about the global summit, and they even admitted that Russia could be participating in that summit at some point. So the story already has such a summit on the horizon and is already including Russia into this event. And remember when we dissected Putin's interview to Carlson, this was one of the possible exit strategies out of this war. And now that I think everybody needs to understand that this exit needs to be thought well by the West and everybody involved in the conflict. And President now essentially voiced the idea that you have presented here in our streams quite a while ago. Well, yeah, that's exactly what I heard. Just use the peace formula as a trampoline and invite Russians to that discussion at some point and start the discussion. And we get the information that supposedly now they are following this path. And of course, yeah, right, it was very smart. You needed to push Arestovych out of Ukraine in order to follow his advice, right? There was not a single question about corruption. Neither West press nor Ukrainian press asked these questions. So, two options here. Either the interest has faded, or the participants were bleached, so to say, and their questions were sanitized before they're being presented. So what do you think? I think they were picking candidates very delicately for this conference. They did not include Telegram channels. They only left the professional media and official journalists, probably considering the Telegram experience being not exactly the best option. And corruption is a big theme. So there were a lot of topics that could have been discussed, right? Future strategy, details about losses, strategy of the West in supplying us. Corruption is a more delicate question. You need to be asking it in a fashion so it doesn't turn into a hype topic and doesn't cover and blank out all the other questions. I think there are other ways these questions can be asked, and Yuriy Butusov, who was not invited to that, he was voicing a lot of questions that he would have asked Zelensky, but he did not have a chance to. And he has a lot of corruption questions there. But for the second year of war, I would say, conclusion, I would say more interesting questions, more appropriate questions at this point would be, how was this war fought? What will be next? And what is our strategy? And there were some answers to these. There were some. So in the context of how the war was fought, President mentioned the counteroffensive, that the plan of counteroffensive was leaked to Kremlin, to Russia, before we started. So I picked it as the attack on Valery Zaluzhny and lack of security in his domain. How would you read that? Well, that is unknown exactly. It's still unclear. The thesis that was presented by Zelensky is another one that you can spin 15 ways. And I don't know who advised him on presenting it this way, because one can spin it that it were the Western partners that leaked the data, not Ukraine, right? And let's also look at the reality. And let me open a big secret here, that of course there are several plans of the operation, always, not one. And the decision which one will be engaged is being made at the last moment. So then the question is, which of the plans was leaked? Or were all of the plans leaked? Or was the actual actionable plan leaked at the last moment? And it is also unclear, was it leaked from our tables or from our partners' tables? So that thesis was dropped to stir a lot of speculations and thought without much explanation. And such way of communication surprises me, to say the least. So overall estimation, your final opinion about this press conference, I think it will be discussed for a while, but just to wrap it now, in light of a simple question, President with this press conference, was he bringing people to reality or was he creating heightened expectations? It was probably a mixed event. It was not just a press conference, right? They also had roundtable discussions. There were a lot of theses injected in the media sphere during this event. But what it reminds me of, it reminds me that there is less pathos, less emotion, more logical construct being brought. But you know my push that we need to abandon pathos completely and switch to a totally logical field. We can see the vector starting to shape up in this direction, but we still have another message between the lines that, you know, it's hard, but toughen up, eventually it will be better. And as one of the coaches on the psychology, Dobrovolskaya wrote in her post after that, she was saying that there is a drastic difference between pathos statement in all the official channels at the second end of the second year of war, and the difference between that and what people are talking about. It reminds me, and she is a psychologist, right, when families are talking like, here is a picture of me and a husband kissing and hugging each other, while in reality she's telling all her friends and her psychologist how much of an asshole her husband is, and she cannot survive that and tolerate it any longer. So this is the duality tearing our society apart, right? So if you do not post something patriotic or post something hateful about Arestovych, you will become not exactly the right citizen. But in the meantime, after you've done that, you of course go back to discussing, what do you do? Have we lost? If we leave Kiev, where do we go? Do we have a place to go? So these are the questions people are discussing. Our last stream had 2 million views. Some people do want to hear the truth. But, you know, in the official media, Arestovych and Feldman are still scumbags and scoundrels. But from under the pink glasses, they would still be trying to get a glimpse of reality. And that's what a mixed message of this press conference was, I think. So, about Arestovych, speaking of, let's talk about the prognostications for the third year of war. You are stating that likely we will have a change in our government in spring. But with this, I also saw President asking a question of Shmyhal, and he answered and nodded. And I think this is the presidential signal into the environment, into our country media sphere, that Shmyhal is still in his place. He's satisfying president in his professional capacity, and they're coordinating plans, if not strategic, but at least, the near term, which touch on the Q1 and maybe Q2 of this year. So do you think that president, with this gesture at press conference, indicated to the cabinet of ministers that there will not be any reshufflings? Well, if he said, Nikolay, I don't like him and I don't like his results, the result of his work, and I'm firing him, what do you think would have happened during the press conference and after that conference? Well, here's the thing. Shmyhal may be very satisfactory overall, but the interests of Ukraine would demand now that he needs to be replaced, similar as like with Zaluzhny, what it worked for president. And what I outlined there, this is one of the base scenarios in the framework of political realism. And replacement and reshuffling of government, I think, is inevitable, because the problem of the 31st of March, when the rating will be discussed of our president, they'll have to use some trump cards. And they have serious cards in terms of support of the West. President is being supported by the West at large right now. So from the point of view of communications, that's a good achievement. Now about the internal questions. Mr. President, you're losing legitimacy on the 31st of March till the 20-somethings of May, to the inauguration date. So as we get closer to that time, there'll be more and more questions. People will be asking him more and more about that, because he always has political opponents. There are always psyops by the enemy as well. And he'll be asked a lot of questions. He'll be asked the same questions, by the way, that Yuriy Butosov is writing in his blog now, about corruption, about internal economic situation, about economic basis for mobilization, which will supposedly be going at that time, as we'll be trying to draft 500,000 and will be failing to do so. Situation on the front will be more difficult. And there are only two answers to these questions in democratic countries: replacement of government or elections. And since we're not holding elections, then even if Shmyhal is an ideal person, 10 times more ideal than he is now, it will come into the framework, and that question will be posted. Perhaps not in March, perhaps later, but this will be one of the moves which, how should I put it, which would prolong the end, I guess, the path to an end. So hang on, right? We're taking measures, don't be too rowdy. See, we're replacing the government. Speaking of legitimacy, Zelensky said that this is Russian narrative, that he saw some documents and there were some numbers, as somebody was paying to somebody. And from the logic of his answer, from that thesis, that everybody who is bringing up the question of legitimacy of his power are Russian paid agents or people connected with them. Yeah, that reminds me of an old truism, right, that the whole Petersburg is talking about, that everybody is under the death threat. That's from the culture reference. But in the Constitution, we do have a hole about that. We have not thought through this scenario, what to do in the event when calendar duties, calendar time frame is leaking out, is over, but in reality there is war raging, and we cannot really do the re-election at the moment. And now we have Congress, who is also happy about that, is happy about not being re-elected. With Congress, it's easy. They'll continue running what they do until the re-elections. And the president thinks that he'll be doing the same. Problem is that Congress is generally a collective body elected by population, but president is a single point failure in this case, and he needs to transfer his power personally to the next one whenever that elections happen. And there'll be a lot of questions brought. Now, we should warn that there will be questions to president. Illegitimacy or power usurpation. And these will be the questions pushing that swing one way or the other in the times when the war fighting will become more difficult, when taxes will be rising. We already announced that. And of course, Russians will be using that. But how should I put it? They have huge capabilities to influence Ukraine, especially through unofficial media Telegram channels. They can propagate a lot of rumors and all, just recent rumors about attacking Kiev that surfaced up, like who's going to be attacking Kiev, with what, from where. But still, these rumors, there are channels for these rumors to spill through. And then you hear people saying that some power ministers are evacuating their families and you guys should pack your bags and go because 2 days from now Russians will attack Kiev. So this, you would think people would have stopped believing these rumors by the second year of this war, but even regardless that Russia doesn't have enough soldiers across the border, right? They're still believing that. And do you think they will not believe the stories about usurpation of power and loss of legitimacy? Of course they will be believing that, and you'll have to respond to that with more than 1 or 2 lines on a press conference. With what more? Claim that everybody who talks about that is an agent of Kremlin? Of course, right? Plus, let's not forget that President of Russian Federation, Vladimir Putin, since the 17th of March, will again re-legitimize his presence, regardless of how the process goes. They'll still follow that. Europe will also re-legitimize themselves, and then there'll be elections in the United States, and we will still be stuck with the current situation. And I wouldn't say that they're illegitimate, but these are people with unconfirmed legitimacy for the next period, right? And we have holes in our constitution that need patching. So a question is why having constitutional majority of his party in Congress, they would not address this matter in the constitution. Perhaps they're afraid of the real question then, what if you guys are usurping the power in this case? But in any case, these are signs of real problem. So if first they're afraid of the conversations about usurpation of power, then they probably understand the degree of danger of that process, and it will keep rising anyway. Or the second option would be why they're not doing it is that they have their Congress a disarray that would not even want to discuss these matters, and is systematically failing to adopt different laws that would allow to ease a lot of process in the military. And why don't we discuss that in the open with society? That still puzzles me, because if I was there, I would be discussing it very openly, excluding the secret matters. But when Telegram channels close to President are writing about the start of the serious conversation, I would say I am noticing an attempt to start a serious conversation. I don't think it actually is happening yet. A grown-up conversation is simple answers to difficult questions. The facts are 1, 2, and 3. In one sci-fi story, one king wrote, and those who would read my letter in reverse and try to read between the lines, I want to answer them that those people who like to read in the shadows and between the lines, that my messages contain only what they contain and not announce more. That's the king's answer in that sci-fi. There was also a country at war there, and that was an answer of the leader of the country. I think we should follow. So formally, in European Union, in leadership of European Union, among people who are making decisions, Alexei, how in the United States and Britain, among people who are making decisions, how are they treating the question of legitimacy and following the election formalities in this regard? Do you know what they're discussing? Would it be a very big issue for them if Zelensky's legitimacy runs out at the end of March? They acknowledge the problem. They're not talking about the details, but they definitely acknowledge that this is a weak point that will be attacked. We're all adults here, right? Nobody is saying let's overthrow the government in Ukraine, let's make elections amidst the war. But they acknowledge that this is a weak point. Nobody is screaming there, Zelensky is illegitimate, let's topple him. They're not revolutionaries, right? But they're acknowledging that this is a weak point that will be attacked. And the next question is, how are you going to defend it? You're going to blame everybody to be agents of Moscow? Well, the whole Western media will be talking about the same matter. Are they also Moscow agents as well? And this is the story when not being able to post a question that is touching our people on an emotional level, rather deep, and you cover that as patriotism, that we have to lie because otherwise the war is the path of deceit, and they even bring Sun Tzu to that. And they're avoiding these matters for discussion. This is the behavior of a 3-year-old who is covering his eyes with his hands and tries to peek through, but still, right? And this is the Instagram behavior. Look, everything is fantastic. Look, we're smiling and sitting. Well, in reality, they're already deep in the stage of divorce and ready to strangle everybody. Oh, by the way, I'm getting a message by a journalist of the Western media. She's watching us right now live. Her colleague asked the question and got her ass beaten by the main editor. And that matter is not is very delicate. Even in the Western media, they already discussed that. So, yeah, this point will be attacked both from the within and from the without. And it is a poor strategy to blame everybody of being a Moscow agent who brings this question. All right, so your prognosis about the third year. West will face the crisis, Russia will test the 5th article of NATO, and we will be facing a difficult period after the war reconstruction. So are you talking about the change of power in the United States? You think that that would be the weakest point in the timeline when Russia will try to attack the Baltics, perhaps? Right, this is a basis scenario. At first, I think they could engage Moldova with Transnistria. Then there are Baltic countries that they can try to ignite. Today's order by Putin that he recreated some of the military districts, including Leningrad, ex-Leningrad, St. Petersburg, and Moscow. And the logic is that the Leningrad military district is needed for war with countries of Baltic, Sweden, and Finland, and interaction with Baltic fleet. And Moscow is the direct road to Poland through Belarus. These are neighbor fronts. They have recreated them. And then the central and southern, they take upon the territories that they occupied in Ukraine and the war in Ukraine. So this is a strategic matter that they've been preparing for a while, and this leads in the direction of the clash with NATO, and we should not be ignoring that. Second, Baltic countries are digging trenches all of a sudden on the western side, not because they like digging, right? There is some intel coming in. Second, there is an article by Golovanov, and I read it after my prognostication, but it kind of reaffirmed what I was writing about. So what he is saying is that let's skip the 3 years of mindless squabble in the steppes, where we losing a company a day for taking 100 yards back and forth. Somebody calculated, I don't know how true it is, but I heard that in the discussions, that if you aggregate overall numbers that we liberated in the last year and the ones that were captured by Russia, the change will be 13 centimeters delta. Both sides lost tens of thousands. Soldiers killed, civilians killed, humongous loss of material assets, military assets, and to do what? To achieve 13-centimeter border shift. And so he's suggesting let's skip all that and let's go to nuclear threats, because the result will be the same. We'll get to that point at some point, but we might save another 400,000 people. And he has a logic there that Russia wants to bring the situation potentially to a nuclear ultimatum, to a Caribbean crisis version 2. And I am 99% sure that the West will not hold, that they will fold under such an ultimatum. They can perhaps neglect situation with Poland or Baltic countries, but when the threat will be against Paris or German capital or Britain, they will fold. And the West will not be afraid to clash with Russians. Like if Russian tanks will start moving onto Lithuania or Estonia or any other country, they'll be fighting and shooting. They'll be fighting back and holding their territory. But eventually it will escalate to a nuclear threat. And Karaganov is saying that let's just skip all that. Let's go directly to a nuclear ultimatum and see what happens. And I think this stems out of the lack of desire or will to create the mutual security system. And unfortunately, there is realpolitik regardless of the liberal politics that they're conducting now in the West, because realpolitics implies the interests and balance of powers, while liberal politics only implies the emotional appeals and chatter about the values and the things you're protecting. But the problem is that 155mm shells don't care about human rights. And nuclear bomb, in a perspective, falling on London also doesn't give a damn about human rights. So they, of course, will be discussing, will be leading that historic path. How will they do that? We'll see. Putin needs to legitimize himself again, then probably clean up his political arena. And they just started nationalizing some of the factories in Russia. One of the iron factories was nationalized in the Urals. Why? Because we talked about that before. In the United States, according to their data, since the beginning of this war, at the beginning of it, the cost of the shell was 1,500. In Russia, it cost 500. And now in the United States, the cost of the same shell is 8,400. And they failed to increase the production, but they did pump a lot of money into those companies. The capitalization of this company grew, the profits grew, but the shells did not really grow in numbers being produced per time frame. And we don't have more data, but yeah, they're failing to drastically increase the production. So Russians generally are facing a similar issue. When they started doing their military reforms, they figured that there is a limit to how many shells can they produce, because market laws still work. And if you really want to be effective and be productive, you need to remove private sector from military industry. And they're starting with nationalizing of the first company. The owner is arrested, of course. This is the company that produces steel for a lot of military items, nomenclature. And this was inevitable, because the large-scale war that we're facing now, you can wage only while you have government owning production capabilities, where you do not trade for things, where you do not negotiate, where you just send orders. I wrote about that even before knowing all that was going to happen. Again, a while ago, and I was saying that there will be cleaning up the politics from any liberals or any people not supporting Putin fully. And the slogan will be, we're going all the way even to the nuclear war, and who is not with us, he is against us. And that's what they'll use to reshape the ownership of these factories. And you know, what you know, a few days later, they start nationalizing one of the iron producing factories. And there'll be several stages. One of them will be the NATO summit in summer. Then there'll be elections in European Parliament. They'll exert as much pressure as they can to make sure European Parliament becomes more right. And European right is definitely standing on anti-American position and the will to rebalance the political powers through Moscow. And then the third milestone would be the pre-election campaign or election campaign, September, October. And then the hottest one probably would be at the elections of the United States president, and before the president is inaugurated in January. So they'll probably play a two-step with the next government in the United States, likely Trump. Not that they're agreeing, no, it's just the logic of politics. And I don't know when they will start rattling the Baltic countries, not later than autumn, I suspect, or closer to elections in the United States, to create a political crisis in NATO on the 5th article, to demonstrate that NATO is an organization that is on life support and cannot act, and to show that NATO, even if they will try to defend one of their countries, when faced with nuclear apocalypse, they will fail, to resist, and Biden likely will fall in his elections as a leader, as an American leader who is failing to provide for American interests, both in the Western world and everywhere. And people remind him about democracies versus dictatorship and the axis of evil and all that, when he declared all that but failed to act on this. And on the other hand, they'll be considering that, well, we need to make sure there is no nuclear strike on Washington. And Trump wins elections and starts large-scale economic reform in the United States and political reform too. And I think Trump now learned lessons of his previous campaign when he won, but he was alone, so he did not have a team. And he was thinking that the government structures will follow with his orders, but he was sabotaged seriously throughout his time in office. So now he's planning to lay off a lot of people in Department of State and power agencies, and he's bringing his own team and changing American politics drastically. And then they'll probably be offering two contours. One of them would be that Europe will have to take care of their own security, and America will be providing global security, for example, to ensure free shipping and sea trade. And they do want to have that separation. In some logic, it makes sense. And Europeans are grasping at straws now, understanding that they don't have time. And everything is okay, it will work out for them, but except for Ukraine, because for us, it means a very difficult situation. Because one of the conditions, if Russia presents that ultimatum, will be cease of support of Ukraine. They will not abandon us completely from the West. They will not exchange us, but they will say that they will be limiting support significantly. And likely they'll enforce the line of the front that whatever will be at that moment. And we should not be feeding any illusions otherwise. After that, the West will say, you guys have to survive, we'll then give you some money to rebuild and fix the things that were broken during the war. And it will be up to us how well can we use this time to rebuild our production, because one of the main topics that we'll have here, one of the motives would be to make sure we are prepared for the stage 2 of fight with Russia. And our preparation should be in such a way that Russia should not even consider that they would be working with us in information, special services, PSYOP, political pressure, etc. But they would not venture to restart that hot campaign of war again. And this is a very titanic task for Ukraine. It's a difficult one. And I suspect that right now we do not have too many people supporting peace initiatives or ceasefire. I think by the time when the crisis hits, it will be over 60% that will be voting for that. Now our current president has his refusal to negotiate with Putin tied to the situation, to his presidency. So it's kind of his brand now. Even though Yermak did bring up today in his press conference that they actually sent a message to Russian side about the possible Congress and peace discussions. Zelensky is not saying that this is peace negotiations, this is just some consultations, right? Because if he will say that we will be doing that, he will face a lot of backlash from the country, from our people, whom he was pushing and agitating so hard about not negotiating and fighting back. After all the losses we suffered and after not getting enough support and failing to achieve our goals at large. So second, we'll need to get Western aid in the right amount in order to help us. Third, to get this aid and not steal it, which is also difficult for our current state of government, and use it effectively. And that goes back to change of paradigm, to change of Ukrainian picture of us in the world and our ability to invent a new country with new ideology. So it'll be a catastrophic crisis, tectonic crisis for our society, for our country at large. For example, one, neutral status of Ukraine, because one of the motive of Russia would be neutral status of Ukraine and no NATO. And NATO will actually be agreeing with that. They already have agreed to that. They're just deceiving us, saying that, no, we're still considering. We talked about that before. There will be a neutral status, and we'll have to digest that. We'll have to change our constitution. We'll have to remove NATO article from our constitution, make sure the Congress will vote, right? And you'll have to somehow discuss it with people and families who are dying for our right to be part of NATO, that we're not going there, that we'll be taking neutral status, and it will be presented by certain political groups as a catastrophe. By those who are happy about pushing that into the constitution earlier. And it'll be a difficult political crisis, and since our politicians are seldom skilled at anything but stealing and attacking each other, I'm very skeptical about our success in the post-war reconstruction. And that would imply that in 10 years will be no more. Russia will use these 10 years to prepare, and their second round will be more effective than the first one. I don't believe the West will wake up, and I don't believe the Russia will give up. Now a question, are we ready to such a biblical choice? Stop stealing, really get hard on corruption, invest a lot of money into our defense, and do not waste money otherwise. To be so strong after this war, to concentrate all our politics on preparation for the second round of war so it doesn't happen. I do not quite believe we're there yet. And third, to rethink our new basis of government politics inside and outside, so that neutral status would be not a load on our neck, but an advantage, just like Kazakhstan, for example. So another concern, and I think we'll have to rethink the lessons of the last 32 years. How did we get into this war? What will be the end of it? How it would look like? And then we somewhere have to find the right politicians who will manage to explain that to our people and to lead that program of change in the minds of our people, to be open enough to tell them that all our politics led us to the crash. We lost a lot of people, territories, did not get anything in return, even the place at the table where decisions are being made. Decisions were made over our heads, set as ultimatums, and we were not given the right of voice, and that's what likely will happen. And then we say that we start a new stage in life of our country where everything will be anew. Fight with corruption, real economy, and let the creative powers of our people to work and allow them to change the world in the country. I'm not quite sure that we can do it. I'm very sure that we have a colossal potential. If we manage to release it somehow, then even at a double cut and shrunk territory, we'll present a rather self-sufficient country that is capable of conducting realistic politics and will be able to be a serious player in the global arena, like Kazakhstan, roughly. But in order to get there, we need the government to turn its face to people. We need to make sure that people would be asking different things of this government, but they've been deceived, their minds are filled with some bullcrap, and the fact that it's colored in patriotic colors and the patriotic vocabulary, it doesn't change a lot. And it robs us of our perspectives and other scenarios that are possible. So if we find those politicians who can say the truth, what I'm saying now, who can say and address these pain points, that we need to change the logic of our country, the ways of our country. Otherwise, we'll be facing a second war with a perspective of disappearance. And then we do have a chance. But I'm a very big skeptic. Right now, I'm afraid it's going to be very difficult to get out of that emotional and pathos appeal that we've been fostering in our society and our usual proclivity to squabble and to fight with each other. But, God ways are unknown, so maybe things happen. I do know that a lot of miracles are possible after you repent, but I'm afraid we're not there yet as a society. I don't think we can at the moment. All right, Alexei, look, you posted in that prognosis about the time after war time, difficult reconstruction period, that the figure of agreement will likely be a General Zaluzhny, that on his shoulders will be a biblical load. And you were referencing the credit of trust that he has, that Zaluzhny really is the only person in the country. I don't think there's anybody else who has 90+% support and trust, 94% currently, according to the recent poll. But do you think Zaluzhny will be eager to take such responsibility on his shoulders? Because it's also a question of personal choice. So what's your personal estimation? Do you think he will take this burden on his shoulders? Well, first of all, we don't know that. I expect the pressure on him will be very strong, both by formal political pressure, but also informal people's expectations pressure, because people invented a messiah for themselves with all the positive and negative qualities that it brings, because high level of trust is a high level of trust for real reforms. And the scenario that we had with Zelensky just repeats all over again. he was given that carte blanche to do the change. Unfortunately, that didn't go through fully. So now people are giving a second chance to our government in face of Zaluzhny, hopefully. And in order to evaluate the quality of decisions, one needs to understand the alternatives. So imagine that he refuses and he leads his private life. Then what do you think will be the label put on him by people? When we were asking you to be our savior, nobody but you could have addressed it, right? Not even biblical, but more like apocalyptical situation in this case. You, general, then what? Fled responsibility? That is a bad story, and he understands that. So most likely he will go for it. And then everything that ensues will depend upon his level of understanding the current problems, the team that he brings with you, and decisiveness in cleaning our stables, because it's not only about corruption in the country, it's also about the problem that our brains are corrupted in the country with false ideology, with non-desire to speak the truth. So same Instagram syndrome. This is our collective disease as a society. We're patriotic, we're united, we're all together and very emotional about it, but in reality we're very different, and we are afraid to tell the truth to each other. On these conditions, on these terms, serious reforms of a biblical proportion that can save us from the apocalyptic forecast will likely not happen. So somebody else needs to be talking about it too, not just Feldman and Arestovych, but more people. And I do hope that by some things will change, and by autumn our society will be tired enough, both economically and on the front, so it will become rather capable of a big blowback to the government. But also, if you manage this resource right, you can actually use it to inspire hope and to change the processes in the country. So perhaps it will be the last chance of Ukraine, because if we don't use it, then by 28 or by 32, Russia will beat us, and they don't have any illusions. Even after the ceasefire and the peace treaty, they will still be amping up their military complex. They will still be continuing their preparations, despite all the sanctions, and perhaps some of them will even be lifted after the negotiations. So that's their usual proverb, that they prepare way too long, but they ride very fast. So despite that, they will likely continue. And we, after being devastated by the first round of this war, by the West, that is not really supportive, and if the West will be facing the nuclear proposition for the second round of this war, they likely will not even join. So this only can change by changing the character of Russia, changing the character of the West, or changing the character of Ukraine. I don't believe in Russia and in the West, and they're also not our responsibility, but what we can change is internally here. Are we ready for that transformation? I don't know. I'm skeptical so far. End of part 1.